During a family hike in the rugged Washington Cascades, my own son shoved me hard against the gravel trail. I stumbled, rocks tearing into my palms as he leaned over the edge and shouted, "Let the wolves take you!" His voice was cold, final, like I was nothing more than a weight he was glad to cast off. He thought I'd be torn apart or never find my way back to civilization. He thought my death would clear his path to everything I had built, every dollar, every brick, every drop of sweat I poured into this family. But when he came back home, expecting to mourn me with crocodile tears and pocket the inheritance, I was already there, waiting in my armchair, calm as ever. I smiled and told him, "I have a surprise for you." And believe me, he never saw it coming. Before I tell you what happened next, do me one favor, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about survival, patience, and a revenge served colder than any mountain wind. The front door banged open without a knock. Mason stormed in, his hoodie dripping rain, sneakers squeaking against the wood floor. His eyes were sharp with frustration, his jaw clenched. "Dad, I need $10,000 right now." I froze at my desk, invoices spread before me, the pen still warm between my fingers. The force in his tone wasn't a plea, it was a demand. "10,000?" I asked, stunned. "Mason, what's this about?" He paced across the living room, fists tight, shoulders hunched. "I already burned through the money you sent last month. Rent, car payment, the credit cards, they're drowning me. 10,000 tonight, or I'm finished." My chest tightened beneath my flannel. Grease still marked my fingernails from patching up Mrs. Patel's minivan earlier that day. I thought of the years spent in my garage, building 2 auto shops from nothing, working dawn until long past midnight after Sarah died, just so Mason could have opportunities I never dreamed of. "Son, we've talked about this. You can't keep demanding more every month." He turned on me, eyes dark. "You think you're doing me a favor? You owe me. All of this, everything you have, should already be mine." I stared at him, wondering when my boy had transformed into this stranger. Mason wasn't the little kid who used to beg me to take him fishing at Lake Sammamish, who fell asleep on my shoulder during long drives home. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man whose voice dripped with entitlement, whose eyes no longer softened at the sight of me. He slammed his hand down on the kitchen table so hard the silverware rattled. "You're sitting on 2 houses, a business, and retirement savings, and you're telling me you can't spare 10 grand? You can't take care of your own son?" His words cut deeper than any knife. I wanted to shout, to tell him I had already taken care of him every day of his life. But I didn't shout. I held my silence, because silence can be sharper than anger. The truth was, I had sacrificed more than Mason would ever understand. When his mother Sarah passed, I could have folded. My heart nearly did. But Mason was still a boy, and he needed stability, so I buried my grief under grease-stained rags and 14-hour workdays. I ate canned beans so he could have fresh fruit. I sold the old Chevy I loved so I could cover his first semester's tuition. When he wanted a car for his 18th birthday, I pushed my credit card to its breaking point. He didn't see the nights I came home too exhausted to eat, my hands shaking from labor. He only saw the keys in his palm, the tuition receipt paid, the new shoes on his feet. Every victory of his youth had been built on my back. But somewhere along the way, he stopped being grateful. At first it was small, forgotten thank yous, rolled eyes when I asked for help around the house. Then came the sharper edges, mocking my old clothes, calling my shops dinosaurs, laughing at the grease under my nails. And then, when I tightened the monthly allowance, his bitterness became venom. "You're holding me back, Dad," he said once. "You're just a tired old man sitting on money that should be mine." I brushed it off at the time, thinking it was anger talking. But standing there that night, rain dripping from his hoodie, voice sharp with hunger for my savings, I realized it wasn't just talk anymore. This was a plan forming, a darkness that had been waiting for its chance. I just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go. Mason's footsteps echoed as he circled the room, pacing like a predator stalking its prey. "You've had your turn, Dad. You built your shops, you lived your life, you kept everything for yourself. But I'm drowning now. If you won't help me, then what's even the point of being your son?" His words carried no love, no trace of family, only resentment. I sat back in my chair, the lias, they're creaking beneath me. My chest ached, not from fear, but from the heavy weight of disappointment. "Mason," I said slowly, "what you're asking for isn't help, it's a demand, And it's not about survival, it's about control. You want me to hand everything over because you don't want to build it yourself. His eyes flashed, his fists tightening. So what? You're going to rot on top of all this money while I starve? You're going to cling to every dollar until you're in the ground? Maybe that's what you want. But guess what, Dad? I won't wait forever. That was the moment the air in the room shifted. A chill crawled up my spine. This wasn't frustration anymore. It was a threat, sharp and unspoken, but loud enough to freeze me where I sat. I thought of Sarah, her photo still resting on the mantel, her smile caught in a moment before illness took her. She always believed Mason had a good heart buried somewhere under the rebellion and anger, but if she could have heard him then, she would have seen the truth. He wasn't asking for help. He was planning his takeover. I leaned forward, my voice low, steady. You're not getting the house. You're not getting the shops. And you're not getting another dime tonight. If you want more, you're going to have to work for it, just like I did. Mason stopped pacing. He stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating. Then, almost too calm, he said, "Fine, Dad. If you won't give it to me, I'll find another way to get it." His words sank into the room like poison, and though I didn't realize it in that moment, they weren't just empty anger. They were a promise. A promise that soon he'd lead me into the wilderness, under the guise of reconciliation. A promise that he'd try to erase me from the picture so he could claim everything for himself. I didn't know then that my own son was already mapping out the trail where he'd try to leave me for dead. A few days passed after that stormy night, and Mason's silence was heavier than his words had been. Normally he would text me endlessly, sending short, clipped messages about money, deadlines, or emergencies that always turned out to be self-made disasters. But this time, nothing. Just silence. I almost let myself believe he had cooled off, maybe taken my words to heart. Maybe he was finally ready to stand on his own 2 feet. I should have known better. One Sunday morning, the phone buzzed against the counter while I was pouring coffee. Mason's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for another round of demands. But instead his voice was smoother than I expected, almost gentle. "Hey, Dad," he said. "I've been thinking. Maybe we should get away for a bit. Just us. Like old times." The words startled me. He hadn't suggested spending time together in years. "Get away?" I asked carefully. "Yeah," he said quickly. "A family hike. You always loved the trails when I was a kid. We can catch up. Clear. The air. Just a few days in the mountains. No stress. No money talk." Something inside me stirred. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. The thought of hiking together again, father and son, sharing stories under the trees, was enough to soften my guard. Still, there was an urgency in his tone I couldn't ignore. "This weekend would be perfect," he pressed. "I already checked the weather. Clear skies. I even grabbed the permits. You don't have to worry about a thing. Just pack light. I'll handle the rest." His eagerness felt strange, almost rehearsed, but I swallowed my doubt. After years of bitterness, the chance to reconnect with my boy was something I couldn't throw away. He went on, painting the picture so vividly I almost saw it in my mind. The fresh mountain air, the quiet streams, the campfire crackling under the stars. He sounded almost like the Mason I remembered, the boy who used to sit on my shoulders as we hiked up Cougar Mountain, laughing the whole way. "It'll be good for us, Dad," he said softly. "Just trust me." I told myself it was an olive branch. I told myself it was a chance to heal. But later, looking back, I realized it was the bait in a trap. He hadn't softened. He had simply changed tactics. And I, desperate to believe in my son again, stepped willingly into his plan. The week leading up to the hike, Mason was more attentive than I'd seen him in years. He called twice to check in, asked if I was excited, even sent me links to trail maps and photos of the Cascades like some kind of travel agent. On the surface, it looked like care, but underneath, there was something rehearsed about it all, like he was playing a role instead of speaking from the heart. I should have seen it then, the cracks in his mask, but I wanted to believe the best. One detail gnawed at me, though. Mason insisted we travel light. "Don't pack too much, Dad," he said. "Just a small bag, couple of snacks, water. I'll carry the gear we'll need." I frowned. When I used to take him hiking, I drilled one lesson into him. Always over-prepare. Extra food, extra water, layers for the cold. Nature is merciless to those who underestimate it. Yet here he was, brushing off the basics. "We'll be fine," he added quickly when I questioned it. "I've got the tent, the stove, all the essentials. Trust me." The morning of our departure, he showed up earlier than expected. tapping his fingers impatiently against the steering wheel while I locked the house. His eyes darted to the watch on his wrist, like he had somewhere more important to be. "We need to hit the trailhead before noon," he said sharply. "Traffic'll kill us otherwise." It felt rushed, too deliberate. Even stranger were the constant checks of his phone. Every 15 minutes, he glanced down, scrolling fast, lips pressed tight. At first I thought it was work, but then I noticed he never answered, never typed, just read whatever was on the screen and locked it. Again. When I asked, he shrugged. "Just the weather," he claimed, but his voice had that clipped edge that told me not to dig deeper. As we loaded into the car, I noticed the packs. Mine was light, almost suspiciously so. His, though, looked newer than anything he'd owned before, sleek, top-of-the-line gear that didn't match the story of him drowning in debt. "Got a deal online," he explained quickly when I raised an eyebrow. His smile was too wide, too practiced. I sat in the passenger seat, the highway stretching out before us, a knot tightening in my gut. Every red flag whispered warnings, but I buried them under hope. Hope that this trip was what he said it was. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we were on the road to healing. We pulled into the gravel lot just before noon, the tires crunching over stones as the mountains rose up in front of us like silent giants. Pines lined the sky, their needles swaying in the breeze, and a thin mist curled over the ridges like smoke. For a moment, it was beautiful, too beautiful, almost enough to calm the unease that had been building in my chest. But then Mason killed the engine, and the quiet pressed in. The trailhead was marked with a weathered wooden sign, hand-carved letters warning hikers to stay on marked paths. As we strapped on our packs, a ranger stepped out from a small outpost cabin nearby. He was a big man, weather-beaten, with a reflective vest and a clipboard in hand. "Afternoon," he called. "You two heading up the ridge trail?" Mason nodded before I could speak. "Yeah, just a quick hike, nothing too serious." The ranger frowned. "Be careful up there. Past the third marker, there's been wolf activity reported the last couple weeks. Packs are ranging lower this season, and those cliffs on the east side, they're unstable. Had a guy slip last spring. Lucky he lived." His eyes flicked to me, then back to Mason. "Stay on the main loop. No shortcuts, no wandering off." I opened my mouth to thank him, but Mason cut in fast. "Got it. Thanks. We'll be fine." His tone was sharp, dismissive. He turned his back before the ranger could say more, already marching toward the trail. I lingered for a moment, offering a polite nod. "We'll be careful," I promised. The ranger studied me, his brow furrowed like he wanted to say more, then he just sighed and went back to his clipboard. I jogged to catch up with Mason. "Did you hear him?" I asked. "Wolves? Unstable cliffs. Maybe we should stick to the loop." Mason scoffed. "Dad, please. He's just covering himself. They always exaggerate to scare off tourists. I know what I'm doing." But his words didn't sit right. He wasn't an experienced hiker. Not anymore. He hadn't set foot on a real trail in years. Yet there he was, striding ahead with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. The trees swallowed us as we stepped onto the dirt path. The ranger's warnings echoed in my ears, but Mason's back was already several paces ahead, shoulders squared, steps deliberate. And though I couldn't name it yet, a part of me knew he wasn't ignoring the warnings. He was counting on them. The trail wound gently upward at first, the dirt soft beneath our boots, sunlight breaking through the trees in golden beams. For a moment, I almost let myself relax. The air was fresh, sharp with pine, and the sounds of birdsong carried through the branches. My legs ached in that familiar way they always did after a long week in the shop. But there was something grounding about it, too. I remembered all the hikes Sarah and I used to take when Mason was little, her laughter echoing as he darted ahead to collect pine cones. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe this trip really was about reconnecting. But that illusion didn't last long. Mason's pace was fast, too fast, his stride long and restless. I called out, "Hey, slow down, I'm not 20 anymore." He glanced back, smirking. "Guess you should have kept in better shape, old man." The words were playful on the surface, but there was a bite underneath, a deliberate sting that twisted in my gut. We pushed higher, the path narrowing as rocks jutted from the ground. Mason barely waited for me at turns, his phone in his hand every few minutes, pretending to snap photos, but always angling it like he was checking his position. When I asked what he was doing, he muttered something about wanting to remember the view, but his eyes didn't match his tone. At one point, we stopped to sip water near a clearing. I sat on a fallen log, catching my breath, while he stood above me, looking down like he was measuring me, weighing something in his mind. "You ever think about how fragile people are out here?" he asked suddenly. "One wrong step and that's it. No second chances." I stared at him, startled by the coldness in his voice. "That's why you have to respect nature," I replied. "It doesn't forgive carelessness." He smirked again, shaking his head. "Carelessness, huh? Yeah. Or maybe sometimes it's not an accident at all." Then he turned, striding back onto the trail, leaving me unsettled on the log. The air grew heavier as we climbed. The forest seemed darker, the path steeper. Mason's mood shifted like the weather, sometimes eerily cheerful, cracking jokes, other times silent and tense, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the cliffs ahead. Every step I took, I felt the distance between us widening, not just on the trail, but in blood, in loyalty, in trust. By the time we reached the upper ridge, the sun had begun its slow slide toward the horizon, shadows stretching long across the trail. The trees thinned out, opening into a jagged overlook where the land dropped away into a valley of endless green. Wind rushed up from below, sharp and cold, tugging at my jacket. I paused to take it in, chest rising and falling with the effort of the climb, but Mason didn't stop. He stood at the edge, hands in his pockets, staring out at the vastness like a man considering the weight of a decision. I stepped up beside him, wiping sweat from my brow. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said, trying to bridge the silence. He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked, eyes fixed on the cliffs. Finally he muttered, almost too soft to hear, "Yeah, beautiful. And dangerous." I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? That's when he turned to me. His face was calm, almost serene, like he'd already made peace with what he was about to do. "You've held on too long, Dad. All this money, the shops, the house. It should have been mine years ago. You think you're helping me, but you're just in the way. You're old, tired, and out here, nobody would question it if something happened." Before I could respond, he moved, one sharp shove against my chest. My boots skidded against loose gravel, my arms flailing as the ground gave way beneath me. I stumbled backward, the world tilting, heart slamming against my ribs. Rocks tore at my palms as I clawed for balance, the drop yawning below like an open mouth. And then his voice cut through the roar of the wind, clear and cruel. "Let the wolves take you." The words echoed as I fell, bouncing hard against the slope before tumbling into the underbrush. Pain exploded in my side, my breath torn from my lungs. Above, Mason's silhouette loomed for a moment at the ridge, motionless. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his figure vanishing against the darkening sky. The forest swallowed me whole. Branches snapped under my weight, the scent of earth thick in my nose. I lay there, stunned, the distant sound of his retreating footsteps fading. Somewhere, faint but unmistakable, came the haunting cry of wolves carried on the wind. And in that moment, bruised and bleeding, I realized my son hadn't just abandoned me, he had sentenced me. The world was a blur of pain and shadows. Every breath came ragged, sharp knives digging into my ribs with each inhale. I tried to push myself up, but my arms trembled, useless against the weight of my body. For a moment, I thought maybe this was it, that Mason had gotten what he wanted, and the wilderness would finish what he started. But then the cold pressed in, seeping through my clothes, and instinct kicked harder than despair. I wasn't ready to give him the satisfaction of my death. I rolled onto my side, gasping, and forced myself onto my knees. My palms stung, raw with cuts from the fall, and blood dripped down my temple where a rock had split the skin. Around me the forest was silent but watchful. The air carried a scent both wild and unsettling, pine, damp soil, and something muskier underneath, an animal presence that prickled the hairs at the back of my neck. The first howl came distant, almost mournful, a wolf's call, echoing across the valley. Then another answered, closer this time, sharper, layered with hunger. My pulse hammered. Mason's words replayed in my head. "Let the wolves take you." It hadn't just been cruelty. He knew. He knew this was wolf territory. He had chosen. In this place, for that reason. I staggered to my feet, legs unsteady, vision swimming. The trail above was out of reach, too steep, too broken. My only option was forward, deeper into the trees, hoping the canopy would shield me, hoping I could find water, shelter, anything to buy me time. Every step was agony, but I forced them anyway, clutching my side where bruises bloomed hot beneath my ribs. My boots sank into mud, twigs snapped underfoot, and each sound seemed to shout my presence to whatever prowled nearby. The howls came again, closer now, weaving through the branches like a taunt. I pressed myself against a tree, holding my breath, listening. The forest wasn't empty. I could feel eyes on me, tracking, waiting. Darkness bled across the sky, the sun sinking fast. Panic whispered in my ear, urging me to run, but running blind in the woods was a death sentence of its own. So I moved slow, deliberate, clinging to every ounce of stubborn will I had left. Mason thought I'd collapse out here, just another headline about an old man who wandered too far. But if wolves were going to test me, they'd find out I was harder to kill than my son calculated. Each step forward was like dragging chains through the dirt, every breath reminding me of the bruise blooming along my ribs. My body screamed for rest, for surrender, but my mind latched onto one thought. Mason would not win. If I died here, if the wolves tore me apart, and the papers reported my tragic accident, he'd stand at my funeral wearing crocodile tears, already planning how to spend the money he thought he deserved. That image burned hotter than the pain. I gritted my teeth and pressed deeper into the forest. The canopy thickened, blotting out the last pale streaks of sunset, and the darkness closed in like a suffocating blanket. Somewhere behind me, a branch snapped. My heart lurched. I spun, eyes scanning the shadows, but saw nothing. The silence that followed was worse than noise, the kind of silence that meant something was waiting. I kept moving, leaning against trees when my legs buckled. In the stillness, memories crept in, memories I hadn't asked for, but needed. Sarah's face, glowing by firelight during our first camping trip, her laugh echoing through the woods as Mason, still a boy, tried roasting marshmallows and burned every one. I remembered promising her, after her diagnosis, that I'd raise him right, that I'd never give up on him no matter how hard it got. That promise carried me through long nights in the shop, through bills stacked higher than I could count, through loneliness so sharp it threatened to hollow me out. And now, here I was, limping through the dark, abandoned by the very boy I built my world around. But even in that betrayal, I found something, a kind of stubborn pride. Sarah had always told me I was too hard-headed to quit, and maybe she was right. I wasn't going to lie down in the dirt and let my son write my ending. I wasn't going to let wolves, or his greed, decide my fate. I spotted the faint glimmer of water through the trees, and pushed toward it. A stream trickled between mossy rocks, silver under the moonlight. I knelt, cupping the cold water in my hands, letting it steady me, clear my head. The howls rose again, closer now, no longer mournful but sharp, urgent. They were hunting. I straightened, water dripping from my chin, and whispered into the dark, "Not tonight. You'll have to wait." Then I forced myself onward, one step at a time, clinging to the one weapon Mason had never counted on, my refusal to give up. The forest grew restless around me, every shadow alive, every rustle magnified until my nerves thrummed like electric wires. My boots slipped on damp soil as I pressed forward, and that's when I heard it. Low, guttural, not the long, haunting howl I'd heard before, but the short, sharp growl of something near. Too near. My breath froze in my chest. Through the tangle of brush, I caught the faint gleam of eyes. 2, then 4, glinting yellow against the dark. Wolves. They stood half-hidden, their bodies still, shoulders rippling with restrained power. One stepped forward, its paws silent on the leaves, nose twitching as it caught my scent. My stomach dropped. They were no longer calling from a distance. They were here, circling. Instinct screamed at me to run, but reason cut through the panic. Running would trigger them, turn me into prey, and I didn't have the strength to outrun shadows. My gaze shot upward. To the right, a slope rose into a rocky outcropping. It wasn't much, but it was higher ground, the kind of place I could put my back against stone instead of leaving it exposed. With a grunt, I forced my legs into motion, stumbling toward it. Twigs cracked behind me, the sound of paws breaking cover. My lungs burned as I scrambled up the incline, gripping roots and jutting rocks, pulling myself higher, inch by inch. My side flared with pain, but I didn't stop. Not until I reached a ledge where I could plant my boots and turn to face the darkness below. The wolves had followed, 3 of them now, their shapes ghost-like between the trees. They didn't charge, not yet. They paced, ears twitching, eyes locked on me with a hunger that churned my gut. I picked up a broken branch, jagged at the end, and held it tight, my chest heaving. It was pitiful against teeth and claws, but it was something. Minutes dragged like hours. The pack circled, then paused, as though deciding whether I was worth the effort. My knuckles whitened around the branch, sweat stinging my cuts. Finally, one wolf let out a sharp bark, and the others melted back into the shadows, vanishing as silently as they had come. Relief hit me like a wave, but it was shallow. They hadn't given up. They were patient. They'd wait for weakness. I leaned back against the cold rock, shaking, whispering to the night, "You'll have to be quicker than that. I'm not done yet." I don't know how long I sat there on that ledge, clinging to the rock, like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to life. The cold crept deeper into my bones, and my limbs trembled from exhaustion. Every sound of the forest sharpened my nerves, but eventually the silence stretched too long, too heavy, and I realized the wolves had slipped further into the dark. They weren't gone. They were circling, waiting. But for now, I had space to move. I slid carefully down the slope, gripping branches, forcing my body to obey, even as it protested with every aching step. My boots sank into mud near the stream again, and I followed its winding path, hoping water would lead me closer to safety. My breath fogged in the air, each exhale a reminder of how little strength I had left. Then, just as my vision began to blur, I heard it. Voices. Human voices. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks, some cruel echo of memory, but then a flashlight beam cut through the trees, slicing the dark. "Over here!" a man shouted, his voice steady, trained. Figures emerged from the shadows, 3 of them, wearing reflective jackets with Sayar printed across the back. Search and rescue. I nearly collapsed in relief. One of them rushed to my side, slipping an arm under mine. "Easy, sir. We've got you," he said. His face was young, determined, a stranger, but in that moment the closest thing to family I had. Another volunteer scanned the area with his light. "Tracks," he muttered. "Wolves, recent. We need to move now." I wanted to explain everything, to tell them what Mason had done, the shove, the words, the plan, but my throat tightened. All I could manage was a rasped, "My son. He left me." They exchanged looks but didn't press, not yet. Instead, they focused on getting me out. They guided me through the forest with practiced steps, one of them radioing updates as we went. The beam of their flashlights was the most beautiful sight I'd seen in days. Each crunch of their boots on the trail was a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore, that Mason hadn't won. When we reached their truck at the trailhead, I turned once, looking back into the darkness. Somewhere out there, wolves prowled, patient and hungry. But they hadn't taken me. My son hadn't taken me. And I swore to myself, as the volunteers loaded me into safety, that I would use this second chance not just to survive, but to strike back. The ride back into town was a blur of headlights and hushed radio chatter. The volunteers asked me questions, where I'd fallen, how long I'd been out there, whether I needed immediate medical attention, but I answered in fragments, my mind already running far ahead of my words. Rage should have consumed me. After all, my son had tried to kill me. But instead, a cold stillness settled inside me, sharp and focused, like a blade being honed on stone. Anger fades, but resolve, that stays. At the small ranger station, they checked me over, patched my cuts, gave me water, and insisted on calling an ambulance. I refused. Bruised, battered, aching. I was still alive, still breathing, and I wasn't about to waste time lying in a hospital bed while Mason returned home, already plotting how to spin his story. No, I needed to move quickly, quietly. One of the older rangers, a grizzled man with years etched into his face, asked gently, "Did you fall, or did someone push you?" His eyes searched mine, steady and knowing. I hesitated. 1,000 answers burned at the edge of my tongue, but I swallowed them. "I'll handle it," I said instead, my voice even. The ranger studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I was saying. That night, when the volunteers finally dropped me at my house, I stood in the doorway, staring at the familiar walls, the worn furniture, the photo of Sarah on the mantel. Home. I'd made it back alive, against every odd Mason had stacked against me. My body screamed for rest, but my mind refused. I sat at my desk, spreading out old documents, financial records, the will I hadn't looked at in years. Mason thought he had played his final card. He thought leaving me for the wolves meant he'd already won. But Mason underestimated me. He thought I was weak, that my years of sacrifice had drained me. What he didn't realize was that sacrifice makes you stronger. It teaches patience, it teaches endurance, and it teaches the kind of discipline that can outlast betrayal. I didn't need to shout or curse, or let rage blind me. No, my revenge would be precise. It would be legal. It would be undeniable. Mason wanted everything I had built. Fine. I would show him what it meant to lose, not by accident, not by misfortune, but by design. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, an old friend named Harris, who had seen me through every milestone since Sarah's passing. He answered groggily, It was nearly midnight, but when he heard the steadiness in my voice, he sobered instantly. "I need to update the will," I told him. "Immediately." No hesitation, no explanation offered, just that. He agreed to meet me the next morning. When dawn broke, I was there in his office, bruises hidden beneath my flannel and jacket. Harris's eyes narrowed when he saw me. "You look like hell," he said. I didn't deny it. Instead, I laid out everything in calm, measured tones. Not the shove, not the words, not the wolves. I left those details unsaid. What mattered was the future. "Mason cannot inherit a cent," I told him. "If anything happens to me, it goes to charity. All of it. And I want witnesses, paper trails, ironclad." Harris tapped his pen against the desk, studying me. "You're serious. Dead serious." By noon, the paperwork was underway. But the will wasn't enough. I needed eyes and ears to confirm what Mason had done, people who could step forward when the time came. I reached out quietly to the ranger who had questioned me, leaving a message that I'd like his official notes filed. Then I called one of the SAR volunteers who had pulled me from the forest, thanking him again and asking casually if he'd be willing to write down the condition they found me in. His voice was kind, steady. "Of course. We'll put it on record." Piece by piece, I built my case. Not a case of vengeance in the old sense, but one of protection. Mason had tried once. He would try again unless I cut him off completely. And when he did, I wanted the world to see the truth with their own eyes. That night I spread the fresh documents across my desk. The new will, notarized and sealed, a folder of statements already forming. My hand rested on Sarah's. "Photo. I won't fail again," I whispered. "He wanted the wolves to take me, but I'll make sure his own hunger destroys him instead." In that quiet room, surrounded by papers instead of shadows, I felt the calmest I had since the moment Mason pushed me. My revenge didn't need fire or fury. It needed patience, and patience I had an endless supply. Mason must have expected the story to spread slowly. A man his age thinks people vanish into the woods all the time. Just another tragic headline buried between traffic reports and weather updates. He didn't know that I had already beaten him home, already sitting in the shadows of my own living room, waiting. The first clue came when I heard his car screech into the driveway late that night, tires spitting gravel. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He burst through the door with all the clumsy drama of someone staging a scene. "Dad?" he called, voice pitched just a little too high. His footsteps pounded across the floorboards. "Dad, where are you?" I sat still at my desk, the lamp casting a faint glow over the paperwork I'd spread out earlier. My heart beat steady. I wanted to see the performance, to watch how far he'd take the lie. He stormed into the kitchen, rattling cupboards, then back into the living room, pulling his hoodie tighter against the drizzle clinging to him. Finally he spotted me. His face froze mid-expression, caught between fake panic and genuine shock. "Dad!" I raised a hand, silencing him before he could finish. "You seem surprised to see me." He blinked, recalibrating. Then his mouth curved into an awkward smile, a mask he slipped on as easily as a glove. I thought you were still on the trail. I came back and you weren't there. I was worried." His words dripped false sweetness, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted to the desk, to the documents stacked neatly, to the glass of water sweating beside my hand. He hadn't expected calm. He hadn't expected control. He'd expected a broken man, or no man at all. "Worried," I repeated, tasting the word like bitter medicine. "Funny. When I fell, I didn't hear worry in your voice. I heard something else." Mason shifted, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to recover. "Dad, come on. You must have hit your head. You're confused. I would never—" But the crack in his composure was wide enough now for anyone to see. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands over the desk. "Save it. We'll talk soon enough." His jaw tightened, but he forced another smile. He thought he still had time, still had control. What he didn't know was that every step of his downfall had already been set in motion. Mason stood there, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards, the silence between us stretching so long it grew heavy. He tried to fill it with words, scrambling to reclaim the upper hand. "Dad, listen, I didn't mean to sound harsh before. You know me. I get stressed. I say things I don't mean. That hike. I just wanted to spend time with you. If something happened out there, I swear, it wasn't my fault." I studied him, my face unreadable. On the desk beside me, the new will sat in its folder, notarized, sealed, undeniable. I didn't need to wave it in his face yet. I wanted to watch him twist himself in knots first. Is that so? I asked softly. He nodded quickly, stepping closer, his hands opening in a mock gesture of innocence. Of course, you've got to believe me. But his eyes betrayed him. They darted toward the window, to the shadows outside, to anywhere but mine. I could almost hear the calculations running in his head, trying to decide whether to keep pushing the lie or to back off and play the dutiful son. He chose the lie. I looked everywhere for you after you slipped, he continued, voice quivering just enough to sound rehearsed. I called your name until my throat hurt. I thought maybe the wolves got to you before I could. I was terrified. His words dripped with insincerity, and every syllable only deepened the pit he was digging for himself. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. You know, Mason, funny thing about wolves, they don't lie. They don't pretend. They show their teeth, and you know exactly what you're dealing with. He froze, his forced sympathy cracking for a split second before he forced a chuckle. Dad, come on, you're making this sound crazy. You hit your head out there. You're not thinking straight. I let the silence do the work. Silence, I'd learned long ago, is the sharpest blade of all. The more I gave him nothing, the more he scrambled to explain, to fill the void with excuses. His voice grew louder, his gestures wilder. The calm mask he had worn when he walked in was slipping fast. I stayed steady, my voice quiet, almost gentle. We'll get to the truth, Mason, but not tonight. Tonight you should rest. Tomorrow I'll have some things to show you. He swallowed hard, searching my face for a clue of what I knew, but I gave him nothing, and that nothing was already breaking him. The next evening I prepared the living room the way a mechanic prepares a workbench. Every tool in its place, every detail accounted for. The small camera sat hidden on the bookshelf, its red light covered by a strip of tape, recording everything in silence. Papers lay neatly on the coffee table. Not the real will, but copies of old drafts Mason might recognize. I wanted to see what his greed would push him to say if he thought I was hesitating, if he thought victory was still within his grasp. Mason arrived just after dusk, his sneakers squeaking across the floor as he stepped inside. This time he wore a smile stretched too tight, a performance already rehearsed. Dad, he said, voice warm, false. I was thinking about our talk last night. Maybe we should just put the past behind us, start fresh. I gestured to the chair opposite me. Sit. Let's talk about the future instead. He lowered himself slowly, eyes darting to the papers. Is that? I nodded. The will. I've been reviewing it. For a moment his mask slipped. His pupils widened, hunger flashing like a wolf catching scent of prey. He leaned forward, voice trembling with eagerness. So you're finally ready to do the right thing? Ready to let me handle things when you're gone? I tilted my head, watching him carr. Eefily. Gone? You make it sound like you expect it sooner rather than later. His smile faltered, but only for a second. I just mean, life is unpredictable, Dad. Look what almost happened on that hike. You could have died out there. I let the words hang in the air, heavy, damning. His tone had carried no grief, no fear, only the certainty of a man who believed my death was part of the plan. Tell me something, Mason, I said softly. When I slipped, what exactly did you say again? He blinked, startled. Then too quickly he chuckled. I don't remember. Something about wolves, maybe. I was in shock, Dad. You can't hold that against me. But the damage was already done. He'd said it himself. The wolves. The very words burned into me that night, and now they were preserved forever, captured by the quiet eye watching from the bookshelf. I leaned back, folding my arms. Interesting, because I remember every syllable, and someday soon others will too. 2 days later, I walked into Harris's office with the same calm determination I carried since stepping out of that forest. He greeted me with a nod, already sliding a stack of documents across the desk. Everything's filed. Mason's name is nowhere near your estate now. It's airtight. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Paperwork was one thing. Justice was another. That afternoon, I paid a visit to the ranger station. The same grizzled ranger who had warned us about the cliffs looked up from his clipboard as I walked in. His eyes flicked to the bruises still fading on my cheek. Back from the dead, he muttered. I told him everything, calmly, without theatrics. The shove, the words, the abandonment. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look surprised. I had a feeling, he said. I'll file my report. If anyone asks, I'll tell them exactly what I warned your boy about before you went up there. From there, I called one of the SAR volunteers. He remembered me clearly, remembered pulling me half dead from the trees. When I asked if he'd be willing to give a statement about the condition I was in when they found me, His answer was firm. Absolutely. No one just walks away from injuries like that without a reason. We'll back you up. Piece by piece, the framework tightened around Mason. Every witness, every statement, every document was another beam in the structure I was building, not just to protect myself, but to ensure his lies collapsed under their own weight. That evening, Harris came by the house. He sat in my living room, flipping open his legal pad. If your son tries to contest this, he'll fail. But more importantly, the evidence you've gathered, the ranger's notes, the SAR statements, your recordings, this is bigger than inheritance now. This is criminal. I nodded slowly. I'd known it from the moment I clawed my way up that slope and heard the wolves howling in the distance. Mason hadn't just betrayed me. He had tried to erase me, and now he was going to face the weight of that decision in the one arena he couldn't manipulate, the law. When Harris left, I stood by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. Somewhere across town, Mason probably thought I was still wavering, still deciding his future. What he didn't know was the future had already been decided, not by him, by me. It happened faster than Mason ever expected. One morning, just as the drizzle lifted from the streets, there was a hard knock at my front door. I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing beside the grizzled ranger and one of the SR volunteers. Mason was just pulling into the driveway, music blaring from his car, when he froze at the sight. His swagger vanished in an instant. The officers stepped forward. "Mason Hart?" one of them asked. He nodded stiffly, his eyes darting to me, searching for answers I wouldn't give. "You're under arrest for attempted murder and reckless endangerment." His mouth opened, then snapped shut. He glanced at me again, desperate. "Dad, tell them this is a mistake." I didn't move, didn't flinch. My voice was steady, colder than any mountain wind. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't survive. The officers moved with practiced efficiency, cuffing him as he sputtered, his voice cracking between anger and panic. "This is insane. He's lying. He fell. He's confused. You can't prove—" But the ranger cut him off. "I warned you about those cliffs, son. I warned you about the wolves. You brushed it off. Now he's standing here alive, and your words are recorded. We don't need to prove anything. You already did that yourself." Mason struggled, his face flushing red. "Dad, please, you're really going to let them do this? I'm your son." That word, son, rang hollow. For years it had been my anchor, the reason I worked myself raw, the reason I sacrificed everything. But in that moment, it was nothing more than a plea from a man who had already buried the meaning of family when he left me for dead. The SAR volunteer shook his head. We found him bruised, bleeding, half-starved. Nobody gets that way from a simple fall. You left him there. The officers guided Mason toward the cruiser, his sneakers scraping against the gravel. His eyes locked on mine one last time, not with love, not even with shame, but with raw hatred. And I stared back, silent, unflinching, until the car door slammed shut and the siren lights painted the street red and blue. For the first time in weeks, I breathed deep, steady. Justice wasn't just a dream anymore. It was in motion. And Mason, my own blood, was finally about to learn that betrayal carries a weight no man can escape. The house was quiet again after they took Mason away, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet I'd lived with for years. This quiet felt clean, deliberate, earned. I sat at my desk the next morning, papers spread across the wood, the ink of fresh signatures drying under the lamp. Harris had been true to his word. The will was finalized, airtight, unshakable. Mason's name appeared nowhere. Not on the shops, not on the houses, not on the savings I had bled my hands to build. Instead, his place had been replaced by something greater. A foundation set up in Sarah's name. It would support search and rescue programs in the Cascades, scholarships for the children of first responders, and trail restoration projects for hikers who respected the land. Every brick Mason had wanted to seize would now stand as a monument to everything he ignored: selflessness, community, and in real legacy. I traced Sarah's name at the top of the document with my finger, the letters steady and strong. "This is for you," I whispered. She had always wanted our lives to mean more than just survival, more than just money, and now, even in her absence, she would guide what I left behind. I thought of Mason, locked in a cell, stewing in anger, waiting for lawyers who couldn't undo what had been done. He had thought inheritance was his shortcut to power, his birthright to squander. But now he had nothing, no claim, no leverage, no father to manipulate, only the bitter taste of failure. It wasn't rage that filled me as I signed the final page. It was something colder, something sharper, vindication. For too long I had carried the guilt of enabling him, of feeding his entitlement with my sacrifices. This was my line in the sand, the moment I took back control not just of my legacy, but of my dignity. I set the pen down, leaned back in the chair, and let the silence wash over me again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of abandonment, or grief, or fear. It was the silence of a man who had survived, who had seen the wolves up close, both in the forest and in his own home, and lived to tell the tale. And Mason? He was no longer my wolf to tame. He was just another predator caught in his own trap. Nights were the hardest. The world went quiet, the shops closed, the streets emptied, and it was just me and the echo of everything that had happened. I'd sit by the window sometimes, watching the rain streak down the glass, thinking about how close I had come to vanishing into the dark forever. One shove, one cruel sentence, one son's hunger for what he thought was his, it had nearly erased me. And yet, here I was, breathing, whole, stronger than before. Mason had wanted the wolves to take me, but in the end, it wasn't the wilderness that threatened to consume me. It was him, my own blood, my own child. That truth cut deeper than claws ever could. Wolves hunt because they must. They take no pleasure in it, no deceit. But my son? He planned it. He smiled through it. That betrayal was colder than any mountain wind. Still, I couldn't let bitterness own me. Bitterness is another kind of wolf, one that feeds on your soul until there's nothing left but bones. I thought of Sarah, her soft voice, her steady faith in me even in the worst years. I knew what she would have said. Don't let him define you. Don't let the cruelty write your story. She was right. So I chose to flip his words on him. When the police report was finalized, when Harris showed me the documentation, I whispered it under my breath, not to Mason, not to the wolves, but to myself. Let the wolves take you. Because that's exactly what had happened. Not the wolves of fur and fang, but the wolves of greed, arrogance, and deceit. They had devoured him from the inside, leaving him hollow, desperate, dangerous. And in the end, he had fed himself to them. That was the real moral of it all. I didn't have to chase revenge with fists or fury. I didn't have to strike back in violence. I simply had to stand, to endure, to let him reveal himself to the world. And when he did, the truth became his undoing. I carried that lesson with me, that sometimes the sharpest weapon isn't rage, it's patience. Wolves circle, they wait, they test. But if you hold steady, if you refuse to break, they leave. Or they tear themselves apart. Mason had chosen his wolves, and I had chosen survival. A month later, I drove back to the mountains. Not for Mason, not for justice, not even for closure. I went for myself. The air was sharp that morning, the kind that cuts clean into your lungs and wakes every nerve in your body. I parked near the same gravel lot where we had started, the wooden trail sign still standing, weathered but firm. For a long moment I just stood there, staring at the path that had nearly become my grave. I walked the first mile in silence, boots pressing into the dirt, birds flitting above as if nothing had ever happened. But when I reached the ridge, the place where Mason's hand had struck my chest, where his voice had echoed, "Let the wolves take you," I stopped. The valley stretched out beneath me, endless, green, untamed. The wind rushed up from below, tugging at my jacket, carrying with it the same haunting cry of a wolf somewhere in the distance. I knelt down, pressing my palm against the earth, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in gratitude. The ground had taken me in and spared me. The wolves had circled but hadn't claimed me. I had been given back my life, and I wasn't about to waste it. From my pocket, I pulled the last letter Mason had sent me from jail, pages filled with excuses, blame, and hollow apologies. I read the first line, then let out a breath and tore it straight down the middle. The pieces fluttered in the wind, scattering into the valley like ashes. "You made your choice, son," I whispered. "Now I've made mine." I turned back toward the trail, each step lighter than the one before. I wasn't carrying Mason's burden anymore. I wasn't carrying his greed, his cruelty, or his betrayal. I was carrying only my own strength, my own dignity, and the quiet wisdom that had brought me home. When I reached the lot again, I looked once more at the mountains. The wolves would always be there, roaming, hunting, testing. But I had faced them and survived, and I wanted everyone who heard my story to remember this. Sometimes the wolves come wearing fur, and sometimes they come wearing your own last name. Either way, you don't let them define your end. You survive, you endure, and in time, you rise stronger. So if my story stayed with you, share it, subscribe, leave a comment, and let others know. Wolves don't always win. Sometimes wisdom does.